From courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast. This is episode number 460. I am Andrew in our forum, and Andrew NLSC on Twitter. I'm joined as always by my co-host Derek. He is Deeper3 in our forum, and also on Twitter at Deeper3G and Deeper384. Derek, we didn't get a chance to connect on Parsec and Play this week, but still plenty to talk about. What's on your mind?
I'll tell you what's on my mind. There is a gentleman by the handle at Jumpman_Germ on Twitter who's been posting comparisons side by side between NBA 2K14 and NBA 2K23 for PS5. And the first video that he showed was LeBron James going in for a dunk. It's the same dunk, the patented LeBron James cock back with one hand.
The tomahawk
dunk.
Yep.
Yeah, the most common one. And the second video was Kobe doing his signature fadeaway. And it's really interesting looking at the comments because what you're going to see is that pretty much everybody thinks that NBA 2K14 looks quite a bit better from a graphical standpoint, jersey movement, jersey textures, lighting, the way the player looks in general. And then many are also saying the animation looks better. But on the most recent Kobe video, the top comment is from TJ, and he states, I low-key like the 14 one better in this comparison. And it has 635 likes. And these tweets are picking up traction. And it still blows me away how much better 2K14 looks in so many ways still than the PS5 Xbox Series X version of NBA 2K23. It's like the jersey movement, it's the lighting, it's the reflections, it's the way the courts look. You mentioned how the New York Knicks court looks. It's not the official they didn't have the rights to Madison Square Garden, but as far as the court, the colors, the reflections, the stadium in general, it just looks so much better on NBA 2K14. And you had a highlight in the top 10 plays of the week this week, and it was from 2K14. You drive baseline with your My Player, and you do an adjusted reverse layup. It looks awesome, but it just stands out in the top 10 because NBA 2K14 looks so good. So I wanted to ask you your feelings on these videos. So NBA 2K14 came out in 2013. So that's, coming up on 10 years ago.
Yeah.
At this point. Does it blow your mind that 2K14 looks so much better in so many different ways than 2K23 on the virtual hardwood?
Well, first of all, a couple of things. I'm glad that this is happening because this means the algorithm is going to be nice to my 2K14 content, potentially. So that's nice. Also, it makes me feel less weird about sticking with 2K14 over 2K23. But although, as you know, I will definitely go back to an old favorite, so I don't have too much shame there. But no, it doesn't surprise me because if you make that comparison, as we've talked about before, you do see that 2K14 holds its own against releases that came after it. Even 2K15, people, as great of a game as 2K15 is, and we do need to talk about that game in greater depth at some point, as we've said before, that people it is, yeah, from a gameplay standpoint, it absolutely is. But people did, and of course it brought back roster editing and brought in My League and brought in some features that were missing from 2K14, which is the biggest knock on 2K14, next gen as it was then, PS4, Xbox One. It brought back those features. But from a gameplay standpoint, 2K14 absolutely holds up as well. And visually, people still hold that in high esteem. It's still the bar, I think, Derek, all these years later. 10 years later, almost 10 years later, as you said, people are still looking at that and saying, that looks fantastic. And I'm also heartened to see that because, as you know, a lot of people say, oh, you only like the old games because of nostalgia. But people are starting to look back at these old games and realize there was something to them. Visually, they achieved that high level, as 2K14 did, but if you actually go back and play them on the sticks, they feel great too.
Right, and you've talked about that as far as what you enjoy more gameplay-wise. Like, you love the post-game in NBA 2K14, just the feel of it and being able to spin off your guy the way that you can, and, basically have more control in the post. And then, we've talked about being able to stop on a dime and pull up, and just the overall better foot planning in that game, less suction, less canned animations. Like, I don't prefer NBA 2K14 over 2K23 for nostalgia or for any of the wrong reasons. I prefer it because it's a better visual and gameplay experience for me. It's definitely more sound on the sticks, and it's definitely more fun to play competitively, whether it's against the computer or it's against another human and whatnot. It's just, it's not even close to as deep as NBA 2K23. It doesn't have the depth. It doesn't have as many classic teams. It doesn't have, all the MyNBA enhancements. It doesn't have, the ability to relocate your team like what was brought in on NBA 2K16 and create your jerseys and courts and all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, when it comes to in between the lines action and look, NBA 2K14 more than holds its own. And some of the other comments on both of the videos were almost comments of the frustration, like displaying frustration, stating, how have they not improved since then visually, right? Especially because we're on new consoles. Why are the jersey physics and jersey look superior? Why is the lighting superior on 2K14? Why haven't we gone forward?
Well, I think it comes down to one word, Derek. Focus. They're focusing on different things. It's not about that authenticity anymore, although there is a lot of authenticity and impressive detail in MyNBA Eras, for example, and certainly there are faces that are a lot better than they were in 2K14. I can vouch for that, having played a lot of 2K14 over the last couple of years, but the focus is not there on making that authentic NBA game. It's about getting all these rewards in my career and my team and the recurrent revenue mechanics and everything. And it sounds like we're beating a dead horse, but the fact of the matter is when you focus on those elements and the live service content and the My Player experience, you don't get that same attention to detail in other areas. And sometimes I've seen games go backwards in these areas before. If you remember, Derek, the early 2000s NBA Lives, there was some primitive and rudimentary facial animations. By the end of that generation, NBA Live didn't have those facial animations anymore.
Right, exactly. And I think that's where the frustration comes is, we, over the years from generation to generation in the past, we saw improvements, right? Like big improvements, like the jump from 2K13 to 2K14 next gen from a graphical standpoint is huge. Like, I still think 2K13 looks good, but they really wowed us.
That's the thing as well, yeah. That huge jump.
PlayStation 4.
Yeah, I don't think
you can see.
Yeah, they haven't been able to replicate that since in any of in any games, right, or certainly the next generation jump most recently.
Right, and the same thing too with PS2 to Xbox 360, right? Sure. Like that, or PS2 to PS3, like huge jump graphically, and you felt like you could do more in the PS3 gen games as well, as far as on the sticks. They were making enhancements and whatnot. And then PS1 to PS2 was a monster jump. You could see that jump. It's clear as day. So yeah, I can see where people are, a little frustrated with that. I know that when I put on NBA 2K14, just the on-court action screams excitement. It's exciting. Like, I think you can agree, like when you jump on the floor with My Player and the crowd's more into it, just the overall lighting in the arena, the feeling of, when you attack the basket and make a big play or you make a big shot, the crowd's reaction and everything. Like, NBA 2K14 is just so full of life. And it just makes it so fun to jump on the virtual hardwood as a result.
Well, you bring up presentation, and obviously 2K23 has some very impressive presentation, but sometimes more is less and less is more. And you have more commentators, for example, in 2K23, which is fantastic. But some of them, as we've discussed before, are not very good, and that takes away from the experience.
Right. Also, I want to point out that the halftime highlights on NBA 2K14, I know it's Damon Bruce presenting, who I thought was awesome. Let's be honest, like, his delivery is amazing. I know that they have, Shaq, Kenny, and Ernie Johnson in the studio on the newer games, but the halftime highlights are just not as good as they were from a presentation standpoint, in my opinion, as they were on 2K14 when Damon Bruce was talking about him. So, yeah, my opinion is that the focus really went away from improving the on-court action for all modes, making it great for all modes, improving graphics to make them, more realistic and more lively. And instead, because the focus is not on those, it's more about how can we get people online, right?
Yes,
how many
absolutely.
different artificial boosts can we have that can we add that people will like? How can we get people into my team? Let's put all this flashy stuff in front of them in the form of, cards and all of this stuff and the way things look and like presentation wise and the menus and all of that stuff. But when it comes down to like between the lines gameplay and enhancements graphically, I think the gameplay's regressed in multiple ways. I've talked about it before. Like if you go back, and I know you've been playing 2K14, the 2K14 shooting mechanics are better than NBA 2K23.
I don't miss not having a green release in 2K14. I thought I would, but I don't.
Right, but yeah, so like 2K14 shooting mechanics they make more sense. The release points make more sense. All of that stuff, and like I've talked about the post game, the being able to stop on a dime and shoot. All of that stuff. Like, I don't think the gameplay has improved since then. I think it's gone backwards or declined. And I don't think the graphics are as appealing or the atmosphere.
And I'm seeing these people go back and make those comparisons, and it is very heartening to see. And it really speaks to how all this stuff about, it's just nostalgia, everything new is better, etc. It's really subscribing to that thought, to that line of thinking that everything new is always better, which historically, there's plenty of innovations or attempted innovations over the years that have proved that incorrect. But people don't go back and compare these games as some of us do, as you and I do, and others in the community go back and play these games and notice the ways that the newer games have regressed, or features that have been lost, or the way that VC earnings have been changed to be less fair. And I think 2K is kind of counting on that at times. In fact, I'm quite sure they are counting on that at times for people to forget that this was actually good, or this was fairer to the consumer when it comes to the VC and whatnot. But absolutely, we have seen some regression there in the gameplay. A lot of it does come down to the boosts, as you said. There are signature skills in 2K14, and some of them you could question whether they should have been there, and there was a couple of exploits around that time. Signature skills came in around 2K13, I believe, and there was that exploit with the acrobat skill where you could do a Euro step on the perimeter and hit threes every single time. So there were issues back then, but it's gotten worse with all the artificial boosts since then.
Yeah, on NBA 2K14, if I put that on, I know that if I can test the computer, they're not going to miss 100% of their shots.
Yes.
Yeah. My brother and I, when we're playing against the computer, using Legends or not, we're holding the computer to such a low percentage from the field. It's so unrealistic and stupid, and it's because they miss every single contested shot. And then on NBA 2K14, if somebody's late closing out on me and I make a good play, I feel like I can hit that shot, and I can hit that shot in that game. But if there's a closeout on NBA 2K23 and the guy is, even if he's late, your chances of hitting that shot are like 0%. It's like almost none, because of the way the shooting mechanics work and the way the closeout mechanics and contested mechanics work. They've just gone away from realism in the basketball video games, which is why I said that when we play NBA 2K23, we can't play it competitively seriously against each other. Like, we can't go head to head and have a good experience. It's a super frustrating experience, and you end up feeling like you have to try to cheese the game in order to really do anything, and then you're not being competitive as a result. So, here's the thing I want to point out, though, and we've talked about it before, and we talked about it on our definitive NBA 2K23 review. We've played it and we like certain things about it as far as NBA 2K23. I got my money's worth with that game.
I agree. Yeah, same. Yeah.
My brother and I are 62 games now into a MyNBA co-op using Legends against the computer. And so we're almost done a full season. It's 12-minute quarters, and we're playing every game. And I'm taking highlights of every game, and some videos are going to go up soon on the YouTube showing some of those highlights. I've played a few divisions now in my team, and I've uploaded those highlights as well. But that doesn't mean that we can't critique the game. That doesn't mean that the game still doesn't have some issues and some major issues as well that, impact the user's experience and whatnot. So I just want to make it clear that I've played the game. I've said I've gotten my money's worth, but critiques still need to be present.
Oh, absolutely. And this is something else that we should always push back on, because there are people who will be apologists. They will be shills. They will say it is just nostalgia, or you're just hating, or you're expecting too much. But expecting value for money is not expecting too much. Criticizing predatory behavior is not unfounded. So, yeah, it's something we should always push back on, this defending the game to ridiculous points. I mean, certainly defend it against any kind of ridiculous criticism, unfounded criticism, as always. That's just the way constructive criticism is supposed to work. But I don't like this pushing back and the whole, oh, you're just whining, the get good, to use the term that I love so much. All that nonsense. Yeah, we should be able to point out these issues and make comparisons to previous games, because there are aspects that previous games did better. There are also aspects, as you said, that 2K23 does better than 2K14, naturally, because there are some technological advancements, there's more content, etc. But 2K14, I think people are really starting to realize what a landmark release it was. They're looking back, especially with it being the 10-year anniversary coming up. I think there is that, maybe the nostalgia drives people to look back, but once they look back, they do see a fantastic product.
Right. NBA 2K23 does a few things better. Contact alley-oops, contact dunks. They do those two better. You can drop step dunk in NBA 2K23. You cannot do that in NBA 2K14. The right stick usage, as far as like choosing which side of the rim you're going to finish on, all of that stuff, that is superior in NBA 2K23. So we're not saying that everything is better in NBA 2K14. We're saying that the on-court experience oftentimes can just be flat out better from a presentation standpoint, visually, atmosphere-wise, and then gameplay-wise. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with stating that. Another thing that NBA 2K23 does that you really can't do on 2K14 is like jump stop dunks and spin moves, like right into a dunk and stuff like that. Like, there's definitely been enhancements that are fun on NBA 2K23, but in my opinion, the whole gameplay experience, nothing is more important than player movement. Nothing's more important than good foot planning, than less suction, than less canned animations. There's nothing more important than control. And I think that 2K23 and shooting, by the way, we're talking about basketball video games, Andrew. Shooting is very important. There's hundreds, there's over 100 shots that go up every single game. But yeah, like, there's nothing more important than having control and just like a great gameplay experience.
Well, to that point, if you wanted to say that 2K14 provides a more enjoyable, superior experience on the sticks, you could argue that. I mean, there are definitely things you couldn't argue, depth, etc., that are better in 2K14. As you said, there are aspects of the gameplay with with shot control and so forth that they have improved in the years since. But I mean, I'm the reason I'm playing 2K14. Yes, I'm very much into this my career and the idea of actually playing through a full career and hitting all these milestones. And I've actually just got the 15th and final Hall of Fame milestone that I need. Well, actually, you only need 10 out of the 15, but I wanted to go for a completionist route and get all 15, and I have now, having achieved that 5th All-Star selection in Year 5. That I'm playing it because it does feel so good on the sticks. It is so enjoyable. With the My Career mode in particular, I'm not beholden to a story. Yes, there is a story in 2K14, the first year of the story, in fact, but it wasn't as intrusive especially after the first year. The story kind of comes from the gameplay and having these generated rookies and giving them nicknames. I'll be writing an article about that very soon. Actually, it's set to go up, and this imagination and the immersiveness of the experience is superior to these predetermined story points and plot points in 2K23 and restricting the user, and you've got to replay missions like as GTA. If you don't get a certain teammate grade and so forth in certain games, which I think is just a terrible way of doing it. To erase progress by not reaching a certain goal and not being able to branch the story or anything like that. Such a mistake for a basketball video game, and obviously the introduction of the neighborhood and everything. And look, we can go back to 2K14, Derek, and we can see hints of what was to come, the clothing and everything, and the playground, the original park, and so forth. But it was just done so much better. And it's such a great experience on the sticks. And yeah, I still will dust off 2K23 and play that from time to time. But at the moment, 2K14 is back in the rotation because it is that much fun.
So before we move on from NBA 2K14, let's talk about the two videos that are going up on the NLSC YouTube over the next few days. They're related to Terry Hansen, your favorite video game basketball character of all time.
The legend.
And yes, and a guy I hadn't heard of before, Eldon Jennings. I had never heard of him before, and you showed me some highlights, and needless to say, I'm impressed. But let's talk about those two 2K14 videos that are going up.
Yeah, so last July, I think it was, this is how far I push back these projects, but last July I posted that video about Sergei Kursov, who is playing for the Celtics, playing for your Celtics, Derek, and has a Clippers tattoo. Because some of the randomly assigned tattoos for the generated rookies in 2K14 also include the NBA logo tattoos, which you can get for your My Player, and they look very weird. In fact, actually, Terry Hansen has a Bulls tattoo. Maybe that's foreshadowing where we should both end up in this my career. But I did that video because I thought it was a funny story. And I thought, you know what? As I'm doing the 2K14 highlights, obviously, on our YouTube channel, I'm doing my story thread where I'm recapping my progress in the forum. You can check that out in our stories section, stories on the virtual hardwood in the NLSC forum, forums.nba-live.com. But I thought for the YouTube channel, why not tell some more stories about players like Terry Hansen and other events that have taken place in my career in the past and moving forward, and just do quick videos, minute to 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes tops, just telling a bit of a story about some of these players and showing some highlights. I thought that would be fun.
And I was able to smooth out the footage to 60 FPS.
Yes.
Which I love the fact that you're all over 60 FPS now since you got your Elgato and whatnot. And I think I'm just floored at how good those videos came out. You did such a great job with your narration. All the close-ups look awesome, oftentimes breathtaking, because 2K14 just looks so good from a broadcast view, from the 2K view, or even just like right close up like those videos are. And yeah, I think people are going to love them. And I'm really glad that you're still into this game and you're just playing what you want. You're not doing the grind anymore. You're not frustrated with basketball gaming. So yeah, this is really cool to see.
Oh, yeah, I'm so glad I left that all behind, and I definitely appreciate you smoothing out that footage. Unfortunately, for those two players, I only had old captures to work with, not taken with the new Elgato, so yeah, I didn't want to put them up there in that condition if I could avoid that in 30 FPS, so you definitely help me out there with the post-production. Yeah, I'm looking forward to having those go live and seeing the response. Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, MBA-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at nba-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
So, Andrew, I got to talk about NBA 2K19 for a moment. So, I finally got back into modding, like legit into it. And it's been a little bit because, as you know, I had released my NBA 2K17 Ultimate Classic Teams roster. And it was V3 of that. I did that, I want to say, a couple of years ago. And I've dabbled in a cyberface here or there, or for the last couple of games, and I've done some conversions to past 2Ks, etc. But I haven't really got into like a roster modding project for a while.
Been a while, yeah.
Yeah. However, I got super motivated to make an NBA 2K19 Ultimate Fantasy Draft roster. And this roster is going to have like the no duplicates, all the best players of all time. And then, players like Ricky Davis, Darius Miles, players that, sometimes are not in like the regular rosters. Maybe they're in the hidden files, or maybe they were made by the community, all of that stuff. And, by the time it's over, I'm probably going to have 500 different players in this roster. So I've been pulling the players from the all-time teams, from the classic teams and whatnot, pulling players from Stildo's amazing retro season mods. So from 1986 to 1995. And the beauty of that is you can get guys in the game who have accurate cyber faces that were made by somebody on the 2K19, roster making team, somebody like Calvin Chan and stuff. You can and get those guys in the fantasy draft roster, and they look amazing. And so Orlando Woolridge, right? He's not in the game by default, but there's an amazing lifelike cyberface that was made for him by Calvin Chan. And he'll obviously get credits in the thread, but I'm going to be able to put Woolridge in that draft roster. But then I'm also taking from Mau Mau's 99 2000, 96 97, and 03 04 roster that he created. I've already gotten permission from I Am Escobar Lopez to use the cyberfaces he made from those rosters. So obviously Mau Mau's going to get credit. He'll get credit. But I'm also pulling players from those eras. So this draft roster is just going to be so complete. And I know that you're not into fantasy drafts really. You've always wanted to take a team into MyNBA or My League or and whatnot and build them and do realistic trades and all of that stuff. But there are a lot of people out there that are super into fantasy drafts.
Oh, definitely.
Including Stildo 33 as well. But I've been converting faces from the newer 2Ks to 2K19. So faces from 2K20, 2K21, 2K22 backwards to 2K19. And then I've been, picking those players from those rosters that I mentioned and everything, and from the default roster. It's just coming together so nicely, and I think it's going to be great to release that to the community.
I have no doubt, and I love that you're so enthusiastic about it. I can hear it in your voice, that how much fun you're having with the project. And sometimes you do need to take a break from those bigger projects to recharge, because they are a huge undertaking. But as you mentioned, a lot of people sharing their work with you to use in those rosters, and that is so important in a modding community. I know there are people who want to have some control over their work, and look, in the past when I was doing the NBA Live updates back in the day, the NBA Live current roster updates, the NLSC branded ones, that I was reluctant to let people use them as a base for their rosters, their current roster updates, because quite often people would basically sit back and wait for me to create all the players and everything, and, can I take your rosters and I'll just make some edits and re-release, and thank you for sitting back and letting me do all the hard work. So I was always a little bit reluctant to do that. It's something I've kind of changed my mind about over the years, because I've come to see the value of open source and that kind of cooperation, especially when so many people were helping out with jersey updates and faces and courts and so forth. But it just goes to show that cooperation is so important to make these mods, these big mods, as good as they can be. And yes, it's probably not my cup of tea as far as franchise modes, but I still love the idea of those fantasy rosters. I love the idea of anyone doing what they're passionate about with modding and making a roster project that speaks to them.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, we should never gatekeep people's experiences as long as they're not hurting anybody else. And we've talked about that numerous times before. And, some of the ways I like to play, you're not a huge fan of, as far as it's not your type of gameplay style. But then there's also some ways that you play that is something that, I probably wouldn't dabble in as often as you do.
Online?
But the point is that we're both having fun. Oh, no, yeah, I stay away from that completely. Yeah, I always stay away from the online scene. But yeah, this is great. And obviously attributes, tendencies, signatures, badges, all of that stuff are going to be edited for each player. And that's one of the beauties of 2K, right? There are just so many editing options, and you got to give them credit for that. I mean, we have the import-export player DNA. We can edit signatures, badges, attributes, tendencies, vitals, contracts, accessories. You name it, you can edit it. And like, they deserve credit for that. And the fact, too, that we've been able to mod the games for all of these years and add our own art and everything. And sure, there's been instances where things have been taken down, but you know what? They're still letting us mod these games. And I think that's great as well. So, yeah, and I also want to thank Luya, who created NBA 2K19 Tools, which is an amazing application that makes roster modding and editing and whatnot just so much easier. And he's been such a great resource to the community. Hats off to him.
No, definitely. I mean, look how much he's helped out with 2K23 and, of course, other 2Ks in recent years. But just having that person in the community who can make those tools and is willing to make them available free of charge and so forth is just so important. It's what our community was founded upon. It's why we're still here over 20 years later, over 25 years later, in fact. So, no, hats off to Luya, absolutely.
So when I do release that roster, there'll be obviously a whole section for credits and whatnot, but feedback is also important. So once you download that roster, it won't be released for another month or so. But once you download that, any feedback you can give me on the thread and the forum, that'd be great.
And speaking of modding developments, nothing really to announce on my end at this time, although I am looking to dabble here and there. Actually, one thing I want to do, Derek, is fix up some of my old rosters that are already out there, just to kind of do not a director's cut, I suppose, but just fix up some issues that I've noticed in our sessions and just put them out there, and maybe include some more faces with the 96 roster for Live 2001, for example, because back in the day, on dial-up, trying to distribute a big roster on dial-up, you couldn't make the archive too big, because uploading and downloading was an issue with those file sizes. But revamping some projects here and there as I look to really get back into it this year. But I also want to give a shout-out to username My Name is Dirty in the forum has just signed up and shared some updated cheat engine tables for roster editing for NBA 2K16. So that's always cool to see.
I saw that.
Old resources.
I'm excited about that. Yeah, I'm excited about 2K16 modding tools because I mod it, I still play it.
Exactly.
And that game's great. So yeah, no, I was excited to see that.
No, and shout out to him for doing that, because we don't always see these resources being made for these older games. Sometimes the resources weren't always available for those games at the time, but that one, those cheat engine tables for the roster editing, they are updated as of the final patch, as far as I can see. So yeah, I've downloaded them. I'll have to give them a go myself.
Yeah, I just want to let our audience know that Andrew is pretty funny when it comes to using his own rosters. He is not afraid to give himself a quick pat on the back. As far as accuracy, he's like, I made this roster 15 or 20 years ago, and look how accurate this is. And I agree with you. It's amazing. But then he's also the same person who will be like throwing his head in his hands and being like, oh my God, how did I miss that?
Look at that dunk package. That's wrong.
Yeah. Like, exactly. Why is that dunk package is wrong. That dunk assignment is wrong. Or you'll be like, oh my God, is that that player have the wrong number? Or this player shouldn't be starting or something like that. Like, you will absolutely call yourself out too. But I think it was NBA Live 99 NBA Live 96 that we were playing. We were playing one of your rosters, and you said to me, you were like, I'm proud of this roster.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm proud of this roster. This roster really plays well.
It works.
And I forgot that I put this much work into it and stuff. The other one too that you were pretty proud about, and I agreed that it was awesome, was NBA Live 2004, the 95-96 roster.
Yes.
And you and I connected on that, where you use the Suns, I want to say.
The Heat, yes. Yeah, that's right.
And I was the Heat, right. And I was the Heat. And just the art in the mod, the way the players played and everything, it was just super accurate. And I know you were proud of that one. So it is cool though to revisit some of your own mods, even like years later and stuff, and be like, wow, I did that. Like I put all of that work into it, and hey, this roster is pretty awesome.
Oh, definitely. And I think sometimes with those bigger projects, especially those the 96 season rosters, in particular for 2001 and 2004, by the time I finished them, a new game was on the horizon, so I didn't get to play with them as much as I worked on them. So going back all these years later and making them part of my retro gaming has just made that retro gaming even more fun than it already was going to be. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. And Parsec opened up the avenue of us revisiting them together.
Exactly.
So, yeah. I mean, it's always better to have a shared experience. And that's the beauty of Parsec is, if you want to show off one of the mods that you worked on, I'm not going to turn it down because I like the game that you're choosing and that you made the mod for. So we get to have a fun experience on the sticks, and I get to see all the work that you did, and vice versa if I wanted to show you something. So yeah, the beauty of Parsec is the fact that we can have these shared experiences.
And shout out to Murat, formerly known as Badger, in the forum. He provided a lot of new art updates for the 96 roster for 2004 that I was able to replace some of the ones that had been made a few years earlier. New faces, a couple of jerseys and courts he fixed up as well. And he's currently looking to do a MyNBA Eras project for Live 06 PC that's coming together quite nicely. And I'll have to see what I can do. Shout out to you, Murat. I haven't been able to provide anything at this time apart from kind words of support, and which I absolutely will offer up because it's some great work being done there. But it's cool to see those games being modded all these years later, and I'm all for it because retro basketball gaming, it is still a niche interest within basketball gaming as a whole. But there's more. We're seeing more enthusiasm for it, Derek, and which I love. And I think if we can update these games with some new rosters or new projects of any kind, people are going to want to revisit these games, and rightfully so.
I have been keeping such a close eye on that NBA Live 06 project by Murat/Badger for the fact that he was able to basically convert data from NBA 2K14 PC from like UBR, URB rosters, etc., and convert it backwards to NBA Live 06. I think he created a script and whatnot. And I saw some footage of mid-'80s action. I want to say it was Lakers versus Celtics or something like that. And it looked absolutely amazing and super accurate. And when those rosters are done, I might be the first person that downloads them. I'm super excited for that. I also wanted to give a quick shout out to Juicy Shackme, who let us know on the Discord that he picked up 4 new games recently. He picked up NBA 2K10 for PlayStation 3, NBA 2K14, which I know you love, for PlayStation 4. He also picked up NBA 2K23 for PS5 and NBA 2K16 for PS4. So those are some excellent pickups, excellent titles, and he's really been growing his collection.
And I love to see that. I mean, I picked up some new games through 2022. For me, a lot of the games I was picking up last year, Derek, were filling in gaps in the collection, usually on other platforms, like the PS2 releases of NBA 2K. Because before that, I had the up to ESPN NBA 2K5 on PS2, and then I went to 360 and PS3. I'd collected those ones, but I went back and filled in the gaps with the remaining PS2 games. And I want to go back and cover 2K11 for PS2, because I've talked about that a lot. The PC version, the 360 PS3 version is basically the same, obviously. I've covered that a lot in Way Back Wednesday. But that PS2 version of 2K11 is kind of interesting how they try to get some of that Jordan content in there on that last-gen version. So it's kind of overlooked because, of course, we're focusing on the PC version in our community, and the wider community is looking at what was then the latest generation, PS3 and 360. But that PS2 version is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think people not started souring on it, but kind of just got a little sick of the 2K PS2 gameplay by the time 2K11 for PS2 was released. The gameplay really didn't show any improvement from 2K6 to 2K11 on the PS2.
Well,
it's
it wasn't
basically
a priority.
Just like,
it wasn't a priority.
Yeah, it wasn't a priority. It was basically the same thing every year. So I don't think it got as much attention as maybe it could have, as if they had made actual enhancements to the gameplay. But by then they were knee deep in the Xbox 360 and PS3, and those were the dominant consoles. I have to bring this up, Andrew. Remember your whole announcement that you could use MyNBA Eras in Play Now? Remember the debug menu?
Oh, yes.
And you remember how they patched it out?
Within 12 hours,
right?
Yeah.
They patched out within 12 hours. Your video had to be taken down, all that fun stuff. But now we just received an announcement. I sent you the tweet. we received an announcement on NBA 2K23 that for Season 4, they're officially adding MyNBA Eras to Play Now. So
Excellent
now it's like
news.
an actual option.
Yeah.
Excellent news. However, I guess somebody pointed out that you will not be able to use custom rosters in it.
That is a shame, yeah. I
Now,
mean, it's better
I
than
haven't
nothing.
tested that myself. Yeah. Like I haven't been able to look at that myself. I don't know what, the validity of that. But if that's the case, that's pretty disappointing because you do have the option of editing those rosters.
Yes.
Right. So if you can edit them, you should be able to load them into like the Play Now experience. And this kind of goes back to the issue where you can't load a roster for freestyle. Like you can't load a custom roster for freestyle anymore. And somebody else told me that the ability to load a roster has also been removed from other 2KU features and whatnot. Maybe even Blacktop. I'm not even sure. Actually, I'm not even sure if you could load a custom roster into Blacktop anyway. But yeah, it's disappointing when they take that type of functionality out of the game.
It is, and it makes me wonder what's happening behind the scenes as far as the UI, because of course a lot of the missing features in 2K14, to go back to that very quickly, a lot of those features were apparently limited or not present because of problems with the back end of the UI. So it could be a situation like that. I'm thinking that this is probably just a more attractive access to that debug menu that they've patched in with this with Season 4 adding this functionality, and that's why there is no added functionality of loading those custom rosters. As you say, though, that is an overarching problem with 2K23 not being able to load those rosters in those modes, not being able to load rosters on PC offline as well. That's another issue that we've touched on before, and it definitely affects our community and what what kind of modding is going to be happening in the years to come, although people do often move on to new games these days with the modding. But yeah, that is kind of a downer, obviously, and it's something we need to suggest to possibly fix. And if they are going to give us this access moving forward, which I hope they do, then that definitely needs to be an option across all modes, obviously. But certainly, since you can edit the MyNBA Eras rosters, you should be able to load them, load custom rosters with the MyNBA Eras Play Now. What they're doing there, but I am glad that they have added it. And yeah, it's something that was going to be on the wish list for them to add next year. But the fact they've got that in there already, I do like that. But yeah, that is kind of a shame.
So my opinion on the matter is the reason why this waited until Season 4 is because we talked about it in the first week of the game coming out when we recorded, I think, the first podcast. It was either the first or second podcast after the game had come out. And we talked about how unbelievably incomplete the MyNBA Eras rosters were. How some players only had like a few real players on it as far as like cyber faces, and then the rest were just created cyber faces or just created players, fakes.
Incorrect
in general.
rosters, yeah.
Like they were cluttered. Like, yeah, the incorrect art for a lot of the teams and whatnot, just rushed ratings, tendencies, badges, signatures, all of that stuff. And my opinion is the reason this waited till Season 4 is because remember there was a huge Cyberface update to the MyNBA Eras rosters recently.
Yes, lots of retro.
And Razor was showing a lot of the faces. Yeah, Razor was showing a lot of the faces and whatnot. They added a ton of faces to the rosters. Looks like they touched up some things on the rosters, maybe listened to some of the community's advice on certain things to fix and whatnot. And now that the rosters are more complete, they're willing to make these rosters available in Play Now so you can just access them without setting up an entire MyNBA Era.
That's
right?
a solid theory.
So,
yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense.
So I really think, and that's disappointing because it means that the game, like that feature was marketed like crazy, right? But it was released incomplete.
I mean, that's the story of 2K's life when it comes to rosters.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not trying to be negative here, but it's pretty obvious that this is the case.
Well, again, it's fair to call these things out. I mean, it's great that it's been added.
Right.
And look, I'm of the mind that, because there's a lot of people that would, when things go missing or they're not added, and when they finally get added, people say, oh, about time. And I've been that way too over the years. But over the years as well, I've come to think, well, it's a fair thing to say, but at the same time, credit where it's due for adding it finally, and I'm glad that it's there. And with this feature,
right, it's great. We talked about how great the idea of it is. Yeah,
and I'm glad that it's here, and I'm glad that they've added this. Better late than never. This access to play now rosters, to play now mode with the retro rosters. That's great that it has been added. We haven't had to wait until next year. I mean, we talk about old games and new games, Derek. Back in the day, something like this, that would have to wait until next year, right? That wouldn't get patched in back in the day. In the days when we only got a couple of patches per year, if we were lucky, we probably wouldn't get access to this.
Right, but they wouldn't have released it incomplete to begin with.
I mean, there is also that. There's that too, yeah.
Yeah, they wouldn't have released a roster. They wouldn't have released rosters with only like 3 real players or 5 real players or something like that. Like that wouldn't have existed. So I think that's the problem today. There's so much. Basically, they can lean on patching, right? They can say, "Well, we'll get to it. We'll get to it later, etc." And I think that stinks a lot of times for the consumer, because oftentimes what was marketed, what players, what somebody may have bought the game for, isn't fully functional and accurate or anything like that for months after they got the game or after the game was originally released. Yeah, so I think that's the bummer in reality.
And that's the fair criticism. Like I say, I've kind of changed my mind about the to be more of a better late than never kind of attitude towards it, and being happy that it's there rather than being snarky that it took so long. But with that being said, there are a lot of valid criticisms about why it took so long, why certain aspects weren't as good as they should have been at launch, the lack of transparency when they modded out when they patched out the debug menu, and when they didn't even mention, and they didn't say, "Oh, look, we weren't supposed to get access to that, but we're working on giving you access." The lack of communication and transparency; those are the things we can criticize. And of course, the lack of custom rosters. There could be a technical reason for that. We don't know. I would speculate that's definitely a possibility. But it is great that we do have that.
Right, it's supposedly technical issues that they didn't have with prior releases, with like 2KU and Freestyle and all that stuff, and then all of a sudden they have it now. Like I don't buy that. It's a decision. Well, I'll just say that. In my opinion, it's a decision.
I mean, it probably is in large part a choice, because we have seen them make these decisions before. Absolutely. I do know that things can get messed up when code is rewritten and then new issues appear. But I mean, I suppose it's me giving the benefit of the doubt when when by my own admission, we know that they haven't always been transparent with us. So that may be naive on my part, but whatever the case, that does need to change in the future. But at the same time, I am glad that they have added that feature in. But yeah, more transparency and honesty would be it would not go astray.
Right, 100%, absolutely. Before we get to the regular mailbag, Andrew, this week's mailbag, we had some responses to last week's mailbag that came in right after we were done recording the episode. So I know that you have those in front of you. And the question that I had posed to the community is, what basketball video games were you playing in 2022, and what were you having the most fun with?
So yeah, we do want to follow up on some of the submissions that came in after we finished recording. We do thank you so much for responding to that question and all of the mailbag prompts that Derek puts out. Ray says that while I spent much more time modding it, a good portion of 2022 was spent on 2K20. Still working on the Olympic mod, and you can check that out in the forum, of course, with the modding potential that 2K20 has, which having a mod that's unique to the game can actually make it special in your heart. And yes, when you do have a mod like that, we kind of touched on that earlier, actually, Derek, that it really enhances an older game. 2K20, not a very old game at this point, but when you are working on a project like that and enhancing it with something new and freshening it up like that, it can be a lot of fun.
2K20 was heavily modded. And just take a look at Thundershack's rosters, the single season rosters, which is very similar to the UBR, but he did rosters from the 2010s, 2000s, 1990s. I want to say he even went back to the 80s and whatnot with those. And he had Olympic teams in there, all-star teams, etc. So, there were a lot of great tools made for 2K20, amazing cyber faces. I've been converting some of them for the 2K19 fantasy draft roster project that I'm working on. There were a lot of amazing modders and tool creators that were working on that game, and I don't blame anybody for sticking with that title because there's so much fun that can be had with all the mods that were made.
Next up, we have Gochos. Says NBA 2K11, baby. Best ever. And like we said last week, a lot of people would agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a game that you and I need to connect on as well and get a few games in. I know that you warmed up to NBA 2K11 many years after it had come out.
Yeah.
You weren't a fan of it when it first came out because it didn't have right stick dribbling, or right stick triple threat that you were super comfortable with the NBA Live series and whatnot. And then, years later, you put on NBA 2K11 and you liked it so much, you even started a roster mod project on it.
Still lingering ideas there that I may still get back into modding that at some point. If nothing else, I'd like to do a base roster just to add some missing players to the Jordan Challenge and put that out there. Maybe people can use as a base for their rosters. So no, I'd love to do that. And once you do get used to that old isomotion system, which I can go back and play that now. I still prefer right stick controls. Don't get me wrong, but I can work with the older controls now. 2K11 is just a fantastic game.
The authenticity in 2K11, the graphics, just the overall gameplay. Like, it's a really fun game. And I don't blame anybody for sticking with that one either.
Next up is Dr. Funk 1984. Says, I've just been playing my team for NBA 2K22 and 2K23, really. Every now and then I would play Hoops on NES or NBA Hangtime on my arcade cabinet. Hangtime is a game we've touched on briefly, and we need to play that again, because that was a really fun session we had. But didn't you get Hoops from your missus on NES for Christmas?
I did, and I actually owned that game when I was younger as well, so it was nice to get it back and whatnot. And that game somehow is kind of addicting. I posted some footage on it of me getting a chase down block, and just the overall controls on that game. I think the game came out in like 1988 or something like that. The controls in that game are actually really fun. Like, it's fun to try to hit shots. It's fun to play defense and everything. And just the fact that you can actually get chase down blocks and it's satisfying in a game that came out in the late 80s, that's pretty impressive. So when I first got it, I was playing it and going one-on-one for a while. And yeah, Hoops is kind of underrated.
I actually have that one as well on NES. That was one of the ones from the 80s that did come out in Power Regions, along with Double Dribble, for example. It really reminds me of another game, though, that came around the same time. I think it might have been the same developers, same engine, if you will. Was it Ultimate Basketball, something like that has very similar gameplay? Do you know which one I'm talking about?
It sounds very familiar. Yeah, I know what game you're talking about, but I can't think of the name.
But no, I played a bit of that one. That we should connect on that one too, just to have some fun with.
Yeah, I'd definitely love to upload some footage to the NLSC YouTube. He also mentioned NBA Hangtime, which I stated on the last podcast is right up there with NBA Jam on Fire Edition as my favorite basketball arcade game of all time. And 2K22, 2K23, my team, obviously I've been playing NBA 2K23, my team, and I played some 2K22 on it as well. And I've warmed up to that mode over the last couple of years.
And in response to that, NBA Live Girl, Sports Gamer, said, I need to get back into the swing of things very soon. It's nice to see what everyone's enjoying. And yeah, I think these conversations are very fun to have, just to see what everyone is playing and just to share some experiences, which is obviously what we're trying to do here on the podcast every week.
Yeah, she's a huge basketball gamer, and her and I were playing on Parsec for a while with me hosting. We played NCAA Basketball 10, NBA Live 10. We played NBA Street Volume 2, and I uploaded those highlights and whatnot. But then she wanted to host, and at the time, Mac hosting on Parsec was kind of in its infancy. And there were issues with getting controls to work and everything like that. So we kind of hit a snag connecting because she wasn't able to host. So maybe the control situation has been ironed out, and her and I can connect with her hosting, because I know that she had a host of basketball games that she owns that she wanted to host during sessions.
I did see a tweet from the official Parsec account mentioning something about better support for Macs.
I did see that too, yeah. And I'm going to have to connect with her and see if we can get a few games in and test that out.
And Dante Campana says, NBA 2K23, PS5, got tons of playing time due to MyNBA Eras. Also spent time with NBA 2K, the original, on Dreamcast, NBA Live 2004 on PS2, NBA Live 06 on 360, and the immortal NBA 2K14 for PS4. So definitely some classics there. And you know how I warmed up to Live 06 on 360. I mean, it's kind of shallow, but I mean the gameplay was even at the time, people said gameplay was pretty strong, and the graphics were great for the era and everything, and that was impressive. It was the lack of depth that really cost the game.
Outside of depth, I think the worst thing about NBA Live 06 is the camera views.
Yes.
Like the camera options. There's nothing that's zoomed out enough where you can have like a good view of the action. You and I connected on NBA Live 06 for the 360 multiple times. We actually had a lot of fun. I think playing the computer on the same team can be a blast. And the gameplay is still so similar to NBA Live 06 for the PS2 that it can still be strong in that regard. I think it's kind of underrated at this point, to be honest with you, and kind of forgotten. He mentioned some other great titles in there. The original NBA 2K, as you know, I've revisited that a bunch in 2022. And my pinned tweet on D4 Gaming on Twitter is the original NBA 2K gameplay. So I'm definitely fond of that game. A lot of memories from playing that game when it was new, and then even all the way up until recently. And yeah, he has very similar game tastes as you and I.
And our friend Mike, MP3, says, honestly, I still love NBA Live 19 and played a lot of it early on in the year till the rosters kept glitching. I remember Mike talking about that, actually. And yeah, that's a turn-off. I
was looking back at some of our old top 10 countdowns, and there was a highlight that he submitted to me, and I think it was number 2 play of the week that week during year 1. And it was him playing NBA Live 19 and hitting a game winner with Mike Conley. And you can hear him after he hits the game winner because he's on the mic and he's like, yes! And he got all pumped up about it. And I know that he loves his NBA Live and that he really enjoyed NBA Live 19. So it's cool that, he's been sticking with that. He deserves a new NBA Live, to be completely honest with you. He seems like such a great guy. We've had many interactions with him. And so I hope that, at some point NBA Live comes back for him.
And for us all, obviously. But yeah, certainly, Mike has definitely been a great supporter of Live over the years, and was putting in those hours into the game and updating it and putting all the work into the rosters, and to have them glitch out. Yeah, I can understand not wanting to continue with that. Real House also replied to him and mentioned, hope we get something this year. It's been too long. Can't take another year with 2K. It's not for me. But he's also back on Live 19 playing the court battles, which was kind of a fun mode. I had a bit of fun with that back in the day, but I'd really prefer franchise.
Real House, if you're still listening to the podcast, get me a highlight. I miss your highlights in the top 10. He used to have some amazing submissions from his individual sessions or when he was connecting with his buddies online. He had some great co-op sessions and co-op highlights as a result. So yeah, get me those highlights.
And finally, Big Perk, Sweet Jones _OTF, played Live 19, 2K21, danced with NCAA 10 on the 360, and last but not least, played NBA Live 09 with the FIBA teams. And yeah, that's another bit of content that's disappeared over the years.
He also streamed NBA Jam on Fire Edition multiple times. I know, I tuned in. So I want to say he was on Twitch, and he was streaming Jam LFE and just having an absolute blast on it. He seems to prefer NBA 2K 21 through 23, and then when he's going back to the classics, it's usually arcade fun or early 2000s lives. And that's the way it is for a lot of people. If you noticed, is the golden era of NBA Live, where it was still number 1 and whatnot in the early 2000s. People will usually, they'll be revisiting lives from that era. And then when it comes to 2K, it's like just them playing the more recent games. But I hear about more people revisiting NBA Lives from the early 2000s than NBA 2Ks from the early 2000s.
Yeah, with 2K, it's probably more the early 2010s at this point.
Right, exactly. I think, that's when you start, because you don't really hear people talk too much at all about 2K6 through 2K9. But you still hear quite a bit of conversation from 2K10 and up. So yeah, I can see that. I definitely agree.
I wonder if it is because of the accessibility of not having right stick controls. So people have gotten very used to that. And that's definitely, speaking from experience, that was always a problem with 2K with me. But yeah, I wonder if other people feel the same.
It's very possible. That wasn't the reason why we stuck with NBA Live back then. I said it on last week's episode. The reason why we stuck with NBA Live as our primary title all the way up until Live 07, which when we switched to 2K at that point on 2K7, was because Live had the depth that we wanted. It had, the legends, the offline legends. It had the deep franchise mode. It had like the atmosphere we wanted, and it had that really fun, fast gameplay as well that we wanted. So we created so many memories with those early NBA Lives. And I don't think it really boiled down to right stick dribbling or no right stick dribbling. It was more just like NBA Live, the culmination of everything. It had everything that we wanted.
2K6, of course, does have Charles Barkley.
Charles Barkley is in NBA 2K6, and what a rare sighting.
What a rare and random appearance for Chuck in that game.
Yeah, you revisited 2K6 recently on the 360, and you had some fun.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a game I'll probably would play a bit more, and I do need to cover in Way Back Wednesday when I get back to the retrospectives, not just the more esoteric topics, which I love doing, of course, but this year one of my goals with Way Back Wednesday is to do some more retrospectives, written and video. It is, of course, the 30th anniversary of NBA Jam this year, so I've already covered the original, probably will recircle back to it, but I am overdue to do a retrospective of Jam 2010 and On Fire Edition, a proper full retrospective. So, stay tuned in April when we get to the 30th anniversary.
Yeah, that's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of fun.
But thank you to everybody who sent in those responses. Sorry we couldn't get to them last week. Unfortunately, came in just a little bit too late, but we did want to circle back to them and, read them out. And once again, Derek, people having a blast with basketball games in 2022, and we want that to continue in 2023.
Absolutely. Please keep us posted on what you're playing, and we want to see your highlights.
But that was last week's mailbag, so we have a new mailbag to get to this week, Derek, so why don't we go ahead and open it up?
To the mailman. Slamming it down with a nasty dunk.
So as I stated in the tweet, NBA 2K11 was the first NBA 2K that had classic teams, and that was obviously the result of the Jordan Challenge. And the classic teams ranged from 85-86 to 97-98. And my question for the community was, there are 9 players on those classic teams with no duplicates. Remember, we're not going to counter duplicates. There's not going to be no multiple Michael Jordans in this answer. There are 9 players that are 90 overall and above. And I asked how many the community could name off the top of their head without cheating.
And of course, while 2K11 did bring us the classic teams with the Jordan Challenge, it wasn't the first game to have classic teams. That was NBA Starting 5 2005, or classic NBA teams, not just Legends teams. That doesn't have the Jordan Challenge. It does have the Can You Enjoy This Gameplay Challenge, as we've talked about before. But yes, 2K11.
Right.
Yeah, right. We need to put that footage on YouTube at some point. It'll be worth revisiting.
Do we?
I mean, I think people need. The people need to know, Derek.
Yeah.
So we probably will revisit that. But 2K11, obviously, such a landmark release for many reasons, including the Jordan Challenge, which again came back in 2K23, and got some interesting responses.
Yeah. So I'm going to quiz you first, and then we're going to get to their responses. So,
of course, yes.
There's a 99 overall player, 96, 93, 92, 92, 91, 91, 90, and 90. And I'm not asking you to put them in order, but how many of these players can you name?
So I'm going to say that MJ is one of them, obviously.
Yep.
Scottie Pippen?
Correct.
Karl Malone?
Correct.
Patrick Ewing?
Incorrect. He's 89.
Ooh, wow. Magic Johnson?
Correct.
Larry Bird?
Correct. You got 5 of them right now.
Kevin McHale?
Nope.
Gary Payton?
Correct. That's 6. Remember, 3 strikes, you're out. You only got 1 strike left.
John Stockton might be lower than that, so I won't go. That's not my guess.
I think Stockton was 88.
Yeah, I was thinking just because of the lack of dunking athleticism probably brought the overall down a little bit. Sean Kemp?
Nope.
No, 3 strikes and I'm out. Okay, so that was 6.
So Kemp was 89. So you got 2. So those are some really good guesses because you got 2 that were right on the fringe. Like they're 289 overalls. Yeah. So I'll tell you the others. So the ones that you missed, and I don't think anybody in the community got this right. The ones that you missed were Clyde Drexler,
of course,
who was 93 overall. Yeah. Isaiah Thomas,
Zeke, yeah.
91. And Neek, 90. Drexler is higher overall than Magic Johnson. And I guess that makes sense because it's the 90-91 Magic. I know that he had just won the MVP the previous year and whatnot, but he wasn't, even though his stats were amazing and he had just won an MVP, he wasn't technically in his prime age-wise. And then Drexler, 91-92,
Peak Drexler.
You be considered, I could say like that's the prime Drexler and whatnot. Pippen is 92 overall on one of the Bulls teams, which is really high. But yeah, I think it's easy to miss players in a quiz like this because you really have to like in your brain, like be able to remember all of Jordan's competition, right? All the different teams and all the memorable games and all the important games and stuff like that.
And of course, some players are slightly lower than they perhaps should be because of the way the overall ratings are calculated, as we've said before. And looking at a couple of these responses, people have been thinking of maybe 2K12 and onwards as well, because they've mentioned players who are not in the Jordan Challenge. But yeah, as you say, you're drawn to those players because these are the great players in NBA history that should be rated high, but they're not in the game.
Right, and maybe I should have clarified that in my tweet for people that didn't know that like it's the teams that were part of the Jordan Challenge that were added as classic teams in the game, because it's pretty clear from the responses that not everybody knew that it was only Jordan Challenge teams, but at the same time there were still a lot of good guesses.
So let's get to those guesses. It's Mike at MC_386 mentions MJ, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, then mentions Bill Russell, who was not in there, Isaiah Thomas, Dominic Wilkins, Hakeem, Dr. J, and Wilt Chamberlain. So he does get MJ, Bird, Magic, and Isaiah and Neek. Yeah.
Yeah, he got 5 of them. And if he had known that it was only for the Jordan Challenge, he could have gotten even more. So, no, those are some great guesses. And obviously the players that he mentioned, like Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, and everything, those are obviously great guesses if you're doing, like, all-time. Like saying that, like all eras were included.
Next up, we have Sweet Jones _OTF. And Big Perk says MJ, Gary Payton, Penny, Patrick Ewing, Bird, Magic, David Robinson, Stockton, Malone, and Pippen.
So obviously he chose a couple players that were not part of the Jordan Challenge that, there were those players weren't on teams in that game, but he guessed Karl Malone in there and he had a few other correct guesses as well. So yeah, good attempt there.
And Nate Starshow, the Live 01 legend, says Jordan, Magic, Bird, Hakeem, Drexler, Shaq, Ewing, Duncan, and Robinson.
Yeah, so obviously the 97-98 Spurs or, a younger David Robinson and whatnot wasn't in 2K11's classic teams. Shaq wasn't in there and whatnot. So, yeah, again, maybe I should have clarified when I sent the tweet for those who were not aware of how 2K11 worked with their classic teams, but he still had a couple really good guesses in there.
While the Jordan Challenge brought us those classic teams, and that's fantastic, it is a shame that we did lose the all-decade teams as a result, because there's some leftover files for David Robinson and Hakeem and so forth in 2K11. They don't always have the correct arm textures, unfortunately, although that can obviously be easily fixed with modding. But it's a shame that, although it added content, we lost that. So it's nice that they have corrected course on that in years to come.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And look how much they've beefed up the classic team, all-time team, content, etc. since then. Like, it's unbelievable how many players and teams are available in the newest 2K.
Once seemed impossible. Once seemed like we'd never get something like that happen. So yeah,
it's very UBR-esque.
Definitely.
And I feel like Jazz Sming and Leftos and whatnot, members of the NLSC community who now work for 2K, I'm sure they've made recommendations in relation to enhancements when it comes to, things similar to UBR and URB.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Next up, we have Ray, MJ, Bird, Ewing, Malone, Drexler, Magic, Dominic, Pippen, and Payton.
Now, that is super impressive. So he got 8 out of 9, and he clearly remembers NBA 2K11 and how the classic teams worked in that game. He guessed Ewing, though, who's 89 overall. That was one of your guesses, instead of Isaiah Thomas. So Isaiah Thomas was over 90 overall.
I mean, I feel Patrick Ewing had an argument to being over 90 overall. That was one of his best seasons, the 95 campaign. And actually, if you go back and play that in the Jordan Challenge, that 95 game, he is an absolute beast, Patrick Ewing, in that challenge. So, yeah, it's you think he must be over 90 overall.
Right, and I love Dominique Wilkins. You know that. He's one of my favorite players of all time. But there can definitely be an argument made that Patrick Ewing should be above Neek or above Gary Payton, et cetera, as far as overall when you're factoring in the seasons that we're discussing.
And Ray also notes that he remembers that this was when 2K was still very harsh on overall ratings. Many bench players have an average of 50 to 65 overall range or so. And yeah, that was definitely the case back in the day. We've talked about that before, that these days even the lowliest bench warmer is still pushing 70 overall.
Right, but I feel like in NBA 2K11, the way the game mechanics work and everything, you can still be effective with those low overall players.
Lonzo G.
Like, I feel like, yeah, exactly. So, like, I feel like the gameplay is strong enough and the players play well enough overall where they can still be effective.
And we have the other Live 01 legend, Roger Ward, says the Glove, Rain Man, Malone, Stockton, Bird, Wilkins, Clyde, Zoe, and Ewing. And again, a couple there that were in 2K12 and not 2K11.
Yeah, that was also a good attempt. And I like some of his like random guesses, like Sean Kemp and Alonzo Mourning. Like, those are excellent players. And, you know, depending on the video game and whatnot, you could absolutely say, hey, those guys are 90 overall or above. I can't remember which trivia I had prior, but Alonzo Mourning was incredibly highly rated.
Was that 2K9? Was it? Or...
I think it might have been. It might have been. No, it wasn't 2K9. I think it was further back. I can't remember which game. I'm gonna have to look back on it.
Or something like that.
Yeah, it was something like that. But yeah, Zoe was incredibly high rated.
That's right. Yeah. Next up, we have Intermediate Difficulty Pete. Good screen name at It's All Good _ on Twitter. Jordan, Pippen, Malone, Stockton, Bird, Magic, Zeke, Drexler, and Ewing. Ewing, again, being that deceptive pick, I suppose, this time around. But he does get Zeke.
Yeah, he got a bunch of them. I think he got about 7. I think Stockton and Ewing, obviously great guesses. Stockton is 88 overall. There can't really be an argument against Stockton having over a 90 overall, depending on what season we're talking about and everything. I mean, all-time steals leader, all-time assist leader. Ridiculous numbers in so many different seasons of his career. Shot a high percentage. One season he shot like 57% from the field at the point guard position. So, like, yeah, I can't argue with anybody who guesses Stockton or Ewing.
Stephen Kelly says Jordan, Magic, Bird, Olajuwon, Shaq, Mailman, Barkley, Pippen, Admiral, Isaiah, in that order. No, not in that order. And Barkley's not in the game, unfortunately.
Well, if you were going 85 to 97 and you were doing that, not factoring in with like the teams that are in 2K11, you're just saying NBA from 85 to 97. Those are some or 98. Those are some damn good guesses.
Oh yeah, no,
right?
I definitely
like
agree.
That could easily be like a top 9 for 85 to 98. So yeah, I give him credit there.
And we head over to the Discord now, where Juicy Shaq Meat answered Jordan, Malone, Bird, Pippen, Ewing, Isaiah Thomas, Magic Johnson, Clyde Drexler, and John Stockton.
Ewing and Stockton again. That's the trend here. Like, people guessing Ewing and Stockton. You guessed Ewing. I think you guessed Stockton as well.
I was going to guess Stockton, but then I thought, no, he's probably going to be like 88, 89, which, as you said, 88. So, yeah.
You were right, yeah. Yeah, so
They're not wrong anyway. They're not got it wrong anyway. But
two legends, yeah.
You could definitely make that argument that he should be at least 90 based on his ranking amongst all-time players and all-time point guards. But yeah, not in 2K11.
Yeah, well, I just want to thank the community for all the responses each week. We got so many responses to the mailbag prompt that I put out on Twitter and on Discord and whatnot. You guys are engaged. You're having fun with the trivia. You're having fun sharing your stories in basketball gaming, and we appreciate you more than you know.
No, it's definitely a lot of fun, and people are really enjoying the quiz approach as well. So I'm glad you brought that in last year.
Yeah, I'll bring a different quiz next week, and I'll try to connect with people in the community too over the next week on Parsec.
With that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. As always, we thank you for tuning in and invite you to join us again next week, either on the NLSC, NBA-Live.com of course, our YouTube channel, or your podcast app of choice. In the meantime, please connect with us on social media, so we can get in touch with us, and of course, stay up to date with all of our content. So Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
Hey, you can reach me on Twitter at D43G and at D4384, and that's D-D-E-E the number 4, THREE. I realized that some people were putting in D43 FOR, and that's not the way it reads. You can also reach me on the NLSC, D for 3, and on YouTube, D for 3.
I am Andrew in our forum, and Andrew NLSC on Twitter. The NLSC is on Twitter and Facebook at the NLSC. Our Instagram is NLSC Basketball. We're on YouTube at youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep it locked to the NLSC itself, NBA-live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. So, thank you once again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.